Daily Detroit is brought to you by the community. Support our work at patreon.com/dailydetroit.
For the last time in 2019, this is your Daily Detroit. I'm Jairus Days.
And I'm Randy Walker. This is episode 407 of the podcast, released on December 31st, 2019.
Happy New Year's Eve! Woo! We were just going to replay one of our listener favorites, our in-depth look at the transformation of Capitol Park in downtown Detroit.
But there are a couple of stories we think you should know about. So let's do that first.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
One of the most watched projects in Detroit is just 11 feet tall. That's the often delayed Robocop statue. First teased in 2011 and funded by an online Kickstarter campaign, the statue has been talked about for almost a decade. After all, more than 2,700 backers ponied up $67,000 plus. And although there have been updates, and I have personally held pieces of this statue in my hands when I visited the Venus Bronze Works in Detroit where he's being built, it has been, Randy, so slow in getting this thing built. When I last visited the studio in 2015, I saw a head, some hands, and parts of the legs were ready. Now, according to a Kickstarter update released today, Robo's almost done. The photos, I'll be honest, they're stunning. Up till now, the statue's been shown as the naked bronze, but now we learn he'll have a dark gray patina in his final form. So when will he be unveiled? The update, which we'll link to in the show notes, says that it'll be this winter. The most recent update in regards to location is outside the Michigan Science Center. So it looks like 2020 will be the year of the Robocop. And I can't help but wonder if we're going to get any updates on a direct sequel to the original 1987 film, Robocop Returns. Last I read, they were still working on the script in June of this year.
Earlier this month, I told you that Detroit donut destination Dillas Delights would be closed for the month of December, but would reopen in January. The donut shop's owner, Herman Hayes, known affectionately as Uncle Herm, had closed the business while he recovered from cancer, but this closure caused him to fall behind on bills. To keep the business open, Uncle Herm has launched a Save Dilla's GoFundMe campaign to raise $15,000. The money would be used to open in a new location and replace aging equipment. As of this recording, he's raised nearly $7,500. Jer, there's got to be a better way for struggling businesses to get through difficult times than asking customers to make donations. This doesn't seem sustainable in the long run.
I think a big thing is that, we got to think bigger. Like in Detroit, so often, we are just scraping by, which means when life happens, stuff goes way off the rails, right? If you're running on razor thin margins, look, people get sick, people deal with stuff, and it's expensive to get sick in this country. So yeah, I get why this is really tough, but we've also got to think about designing our programs, our businesses, with all of that and more in mind. That's important to have the resources to be able to do these kind of things and have businesses that maybe aren't so solely dependent on just one person. And I know that's going to be really hard, right? Because we've all got these things to make happen. We are a town that likes to keep our prices super low, and that's really hard when you're dealing with what is basically an artisanal product. My vegan friends love Dillas Delights. I enjoy them. They're quite good. But it's really tough when you've got an artisanal product. And on top of that, especially in areas of color, there's a pretty big institutional wealth gap, right? In areas of color, there just isn't the wealth in the community to have that backup of, if uncle had an uncle or a brother or a whatever to make these kind of things happen. But something's got to change with this stuff. Otherwise, we're just going to keep seeing this thing over and over again. I will say this though, Randy, I did notice the bit about the new location.
Yeah, I think a new location is a good idea. The current location on John R. downtown doesn't have good parking, and it really isn't close to that many office buildings for those grab and go, grab a box of a dozen donuts for your coworkers people.
Right, because for those folks, you could take the people mover to the nearby Broadway, but for those folks, proximity matters. If there's anything about downtown Detroit, if you're going to be in that core downtown, you need to be a block or less away from your general large employment centers. And there's a couple of things nearby there, but how many, it's a morning spot. So you're going to want to be near workers because since it's not an evening spot, the Opera House doesn't really help you. The Detroit Athletic Club doesn't really help you. So you've got to be close to your customers. I wonder if it'll be downtown or somewhere that maybe parking's a little bit easier. All right, now on to our piece on Capitol Park that originally aired in August. It was one of our most downloaded episodes, and I hope it captures just how much change has happened in downtown Detroit in the last few years. Capitol Park in downtown Detroit has always had a special place in my heart. Located around a triangular block bordered by Griswold, State, and Shelby streets, we'd cross it when Dad would go to work painting offices after hopping off the Jefferson bus, or Mom would take us through on the way to the old Flaming Embers restaurant at the foot of the Broderick Tower. The corner where high-end restaurant Prime and Proper is today had a store where I got my first Hot Wheels set, and I can still taste the burgers I ate as a kid from the McDonald's that was there at Shelby and State. Of course, the park has a much longer history than my time on this earth. For that, here's Dan Austin, founder of HistoricDetroit.org.
Well, a lot of people don't realize that before the Michigan state capital was Lansing, it was Detroit. The reason why Capitol Park is called Capitol Park, capital with an O, is because it was a site of the first state capitol. It sat right in the heart of Capitol Park. So the first state capitol was built in 1828 as a Michigan territorial courthouse. And then when Michigan became a state in 1837, they chose Detroit as the state capital. And then that old courthouse became the first state capital. In 1847, the capital packed up and moved to Lansing, and the rest there is history. But it left behind that original state capitol building, which was turned into Detroit's first high school, Capitol Union. That burned in 1893, so that's gone, but the Capitol Park name honors that location as being really maybe not the birthplace of Michigan statehood, but certainly a place that played a pivotal role in Michigan's early history.
There's even someone buried under the park.
So when Michigan became a state, the boy governor, Stevens T. Mason, ruled Michigan from the state capitol that was right there in Capitol Park. So when Mason died, he actually died in New York, but they moved his remains and interred them underneath a monument to him in Capitol Park. So when they were redesigning Capitol Park a few years ago, they needed to move the statue and with it the remains of the boy governor. And when they went to look for him, he wasn't where they thought he was. So he was the first governor and also the first governor to really go missing, I guess. We had no idea where he was. But they later found him and they reinterred him in the monument. So yeah, lurking underneath Capitol Park are the remains, the bones of its first governor.
Which leads us to the latest news, that the long-anticipated renovation of the Farwell building is complete. In its day, it was a gem of the park, with a big-name designer doing its interior.
So the Farwell building is was one of the many buildings in Detroit where, you wouldn't know the beauty that lurked inside by judging it from the outside. You can't judge a building by its cover, much like a book. This building was built in 1914 and opened in March of 1915. And what made it so unique is that Jesse Farwell, who was a very wealthy Detroit businessman who made his fortune in real estate and shipping, he hired Louis Comfort Tiffany to design him a Heartstopper, if you will, and spared really no expense. I know that sounds like hyperbole, but when you fly Louis Comfort Tiffany in and say, I want you to oversee the installation of all the pretty shiny things in my building, we can only guess how much Farwell spent.
It's the Tiffany of Tiffany's that everyone talks about, right?
Right, yeah, Louis Comfort Tiffany himself. So now when you go back and look at the newspaper articles from the time in 1914, 1915, we know that Tiffany came to Detroit. Some of the articles say that Louis Comfort Tiffany himself oversaw the installation of an incredible Tiffany glass mosaic ceiling that used to be in the lobby. Each of those tiles were individually cut and polished. There were two beautiful Tiffany glass mosaic chandeliers that originally hung in the lobby. Had some incredible brass work. I never saw them because they were long gone by the time I first made it into the Farwell building back in the early 2000s. But some of the most incredible elevator doors and brass work that I've ever seen. And, there are photos of it on HistoricDetroit.org so you can see what was lost. So really, this was a building that I think it flew under a lot of people's radars because from the outside it doesn't look like anything other than used to look like just another abandoned Detroit building. But once you went inside, it was pretty clear that it used to be something really special. And I think as evidence of that is that the building was added to the State Register of Historic Places in 1974 and then the National Register in 1976 because of this interior. Sadly, as the story went for building after building in Detroit through the 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s, it fell on hard times and was abandoned and closed in 1984. And then the vandals and thieves moved in and raped and pillaged it. And we have forever lost irreplaceable architectural work and beauty.
Today, the Farwell is 82 apartments and some retail and offices, developed by Lansing-based Richard Karp and partners Richard Hosey and Kevin Prater. We had the chance this week to go from the private rooftop with stunning views of the city and then take the stairs all the way back down. Many of the details were restored, and others they made adjustments. For instance, there are now 2 main elevators instead of 3 to allow for elevator cars that are up to modern standards. The Tiffany glass has been recreated. Much of it had been stolen or destroyed since the Farwell was abandoned in 1984. A lot of architectural details went missing over the years, whether it was through theft, decay, or as in the case of the decorative cornices, taken down to comply with city code. So I caught up with Brian Rebane of Kramer Design Group, the architects on the project. We talked about recreating the Tiffany ceiling and that decorative cornice.
I'm always amazed by the resources in Detroit area, in Michigan, in the Midwest. You can show people a picture and they can make it. So the tile was just a commercial tile company, and they went to a custom tile manufacturer, but they were able to take the remnants and recreate the tiles. It was a company we work with often. The terracotta cornice, same thing. The cast iron railings, same thing. It's a company we work with often, and they were able to take fragments and rebuild them to match.
And you work on projects from around the country, right?
Yes, mostly in Detroit, but yes, we work around the country.
How does this one stick out compared to the others?
Oh, it's near the top of the list for sure. It's not the biggest we've done. It's maybe not called the fanciest we've done. One I think we've been working on for a very long time. We're 10 years into this project. It was a real hard one, but there was a labor of love on our part and on the part of the owners to really do it right. So that's part of why it's so special.
After checking out the rooftop, we toured the apartments. They're well appointed with tile floors and windows that are reminiscent of what you'd find in a historic building, but are updated for modern dwellings.
So the important thing, and it can be difficult with apartments because you're trying to appeal to the masses. You can't design something that's kind of bespoke to the individual. So it takes a certain soft set of eyes to kind of do it right. The key is to make spaces that are bright, warm, and inviting. One, they absolutely have to be useful and functional. I mean, they have great kitchens, they have great flexible open living spaces, and the light is important. We can't really screw that up. I mean, there's historic regulations that make you do things a certain way, but we know how to do them in an efficient way, a cost-efficient way, and a way that works with current construction standards. But the great thing is the windows are the windows. They're big and beautiful, and they let a ton of light in, and it's important to just embrace that as much as possible.
But renovating a long vacant historic building isn't cheap. Previous reports put the project at nearly $40 million, and that means the rent has to match. The unit I toured had luxury finishes and a luxury price. The one bedroom I saw will set you back more than $2,000 a month. That's on par with the other renovated buildings hitting the market in the so-called 7.2 core area. Those prices are part of what's driving downtown Detroit's comeback. Developers aren't going to take a risk to make apartments for the middle class without a subsidy. It's key to note that this isn't unique to Detroit. All across the country, builders aren't building new things for the middle class, they're building for the wealthy. But that trend has a major effect here. The average rent in the city of Detroit has jumped around 40% in the last 5 years. It's places for mortgage bankers and IT professionals. There's even a nonprofit that's building housing for teachers and firefighters, and under federal guidelines, that's now called affordable. The Farwell of today is a stark contrast to the artist loft space I visited next door just a few years ago. It had no elevator and questionable heat. All the residents were pitching in a couple $100 to cover rent. Now, it's a glimmering tower of luxury lofts. Although Capitol Park is one of the few downtown neighborhoods to mostly survive mass demolition, most of the people that were here before did not stay. It wasn't just artists that had to move for progress, but seniors too. What's now a building called the Albert moved its population of seniors out with little notice back in 2014. The city found places for many of those residents, but it wasn't handled well. Media reports at the time were rather critical. The removal of people on fixed incomes fueled continuing tensions between older Detroiters and young new blood. The older residents were mostly African American, while the newer residents are mostly white. But to be honest, some of the folks I talked to in the area today for this piece were graduating high school when this all happened. They didn't even have a memory of that conflict. And to be clear, Capitol Park is way nicer today than it was back when it was a seedy open-air bus terminal with few, if any, amenities. The only place I ever got jumped in the city of Detroit was in the Capitol Park of old. So you may not be able to afford to live here now, but there's still plenty of reasons to spend time here. For lunch, Sven and I stopped by a new outdoor space called Capitol Cafe. It's a breezy, quick-serve patio restaurant with comfy seats and potted plants. It's reminiscent of something you'd see in larger cities. Over a lobster roll and some gazpacho, Eatori owner Isaac Yatim talked about how this Capitol Cafe space came together.
So the space that you're in, Capitol Cafe, kind of a collaboration between Bedrock and DDP, and they asked us if we wanted to be the operators for it this season. So we jumped on the opportunity. They set up the space. We didn't have too much to do with the design of the space. We designed the container and that kind of aesthetics, and designed the menu and the drink menu, and we just wanted it to be inviting to the neighborhood more than anything. We wanted things to be affordable, approachable, but in a really nice atmosphere.
Now, Zach, is this the menu that you've created here? Is this the same as you find next door at Eatori or different?
No, it's a completely different menu. We wanted this to be quick, casual, but still really good. We prep everything inside of Eatori and we bring it out here. So it's out here, we assemble it out here and cook a couple things out here, but mainly it's a quick assembly. We wanted it to be a quick turnaround. So if you're sitting in the space, your food comes out within a few minutes instead of, waiting 20 minutes. So you can enjoy your lunch in and out of here and, in a nice atmosphere.
Notice you have some pretty unique items, the lobster roll and the Waldorf chicken salad sandwich, which is interesting. Talk about that one.
The Waldorf salad. My aunt used to make that for me when I was a kid, and I absolutely hated it. As a kid, apples, grapes, and chicken, just mayo, that wasn't my thing. Into the adult years, I fell in love with that salad. It reminds me of her, and she's passed away since. So anytime I make that salad, people tend to enjoy it. And I put it in a sandwich just to, make it a little convenient to eat out here.
I've eaten at Eatori a few times. I've definitely done the grab-and-go stuff, things like that. What about being downtown, or what about downtown where you said, I see an opening here? Because for a long time, Capitol Park was not the center of activity, and yet you've seemed to make it go here. What is it that you saw that other people didn't?
So just to tell you a little bit about how we found Eatori, we engaged Bedrock, I want to say almost 5 years ago at this point. And they showed me a lot of spaces. I knew the concept that I wanted, and we put a business plan together and everything, but it had to be a particular neighborhood for this concept to work. When I walked into this space, I absolutely fell in love with it. And 5 years ago, there was nothing here. So we were pretty much the first business in the area to sign a commitment agreement. And we waited about 2.5 years after we did that to build out the space. And Bedrock was super cooperative and let us wait, without having to pay rent for the space. The concept evolved around the demographic that was moving into the neighborhood. So we really wanted to capture the audience, and whether they wanted to dine in, shop in the market and cook for themselves, or just grab something from the grab and go. And I think we've captured that.
If someone comes here, what's the drink and what's the first thing they need to eat here, in your opinion, as you're the maestro of this menu?
They are all my babies, so I can't really tell you that. But she mentioned the mussels earlier, and those are definitely top of my list. The lobster frites are amazing. I would just go down the entire list, honestly. I think the food is fantastic, and we don't change the menu very often. We do add things here and there or take something away that's seasonal. But we wanted Eatori to be that place where you crave the mussels, or the fried chicken is outstanding. That's probably our top seller, actually. But we wanted you to crave that dish and come back for it.
In the Capitol Park of today, there's a pet supply store and a couple salons, a few coffee shops, an Italian joint, a Thai eatery, a burger place, and a walk-up breakfast window. Auto supplier Lear has moved in with their innovation center. Across the street from that, a fake grass pad for dogs to piddle. The historic David Stott Tower, a building that at one time had ice flowing out of its lower floor windows due to a burst pipe in winter, is now residential. Dan Gilbert's folks have built a tower of micro-apartments where a strip club used to be, and a music school has moved in. Also, I'm glad to report that one of my favorite old corners has persisted. There's a neat, modern-looking orange coffee shop attached to an old garage that used to be for Hudson's called Urban Bean. They still spin techno music in the evenings, and during the week you can still go upstairs and get some work done with a great city view. So in general, the future looks bright, if not a bit swankier, for the poster child of downtown Detroit's turnaround, Capitol Park. All right, that'll do it for 2019. It is awesome that you've come with us on this journey this year. Thanks to our members at patreon.com/dailydetroit for supporting us. Thanks to you for listening to us. You know, membership really matters, and the more support we have, the more we can do in 2020.
Also, don't be shy. Tell a friend about the podcast if you find it valuable. Word of mouth really is the best way to grow the show. With that, I'm Randy Walker. We'll be back next year.
And I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and let's make Detroit better together.
But there are a couple of stories we think you should know about. So let's do that first. Ding, ding.